Today, when medicine and crime collide, it is called the diabetes defense or hypoglycemic rage. Can low blood sugar really cause someone to kill? Hypoglycemia occurs when blood sugar drops below normal levels, usually associated with diabetes. It's a dangerous condition that can manifest a variety of serious symptoms, including irrational mood swings, uncontrollable anger, and in extreme cases, something referred to as hypoglycemic rage. Some describe this as a state of involuntary intoxication that renders one incapable of controlling their actions. British man Alistair Padmore was believed to be suffering from severe hypoglycemia when he flew into a violent rampage, attacking his roommate. Padmore stabbed his friend through the heart with a kitchen knife, killing him. When it was proven Padmore was under the influence of a hypoglycemic episode at the time of the murder, he was acquitted. The controversial case resulted in headlines like "Killer Walks Free" and "Diabetes Made Me a Killer." The diabetes defense made headlines again in Colorado. Steve David Garcia Jr., an insulin-dependent diabetic, was convicted of second-degree attempted murder and first-degree assault in 1999 after attacking his wife with a hammer and sentenced to 48 years. But his sentence was altered after a new diabetic defense. And after serving 15 years, Garcia was released. Luckily, Steve's wife survived. After 6 years in prison, his new defense claimed low blood sugar caused him to snap, and it worked. He is now a free man. And he joins us now via Zoom from his home in Colorado. Thank you for joining the show and spending some time speaking to our audience. Can you tell me about the day your wife was attacked? What happened with your blood sugar? What were you feeling physically? What were you aware of?
As on that particular day, it's almost as if though it was a out-of-body experience. I don't remember details, but I can tell you that what was told to me that I did is very indescribable.
Describe what was going on with your blood sugar that day before we get to the specifics of the attack. What was going on in terms of the numbers, your insulin, etc.?
That particular morning, I remember getting up early that morning, anticipating a party. And I gave myself additional insulin because I was anticipating having cake and ice cream, and I knew that that would raise my blood sugar quite high. So I gave myself insulin that morning, and I commuted over to the party. And I just remember getting to the party, picking up my ex-wife, Johnny, and going about to get Stephanie a birthday gift.
And as you walked out of the shop where you were getting the gift, I understand you attacked your wife. Can you describe what apparently happened?
Well, Dr. Oz, they say that I attacked my wife with a hammer. I don't remember the series of events. And they say that my wife got out of the van and started to run. They say that I continued forward to drive over her. And they say that I continued to drive forward. There was a rock that actually saved her life, because as I went over the rock, I hit her, and they found me sitting on a curb, dazed and confused.
Do you know what your blood sugar was by any chance?
When they checked my blood sugar was 24.
24.
Yes, sir.
So Steve's low blood sugar was not part of his original defense. It wasn't until a new attorney contacted him that everything changed. The new lawyer argued that his blood sugar made him attack his wife, and the sentence was then reduced. So what has this meant for you?
Actually, I have no communication with my family, my ex-wife, my children, who have thought of me as being a monster and haven't really communicated with me.
And what are you doing to make sure your blood sugar level stays in a healthy range so you don't fall prey to something like this again?
I do have a endocrinologist who was actually with me at the time. And when I was released, I went back and I saw him, and they had a technology that they call, it's a Dexcom 5. It's a monitored system that gets embedded into my body, and it monitors my blood sugar all the time. So we have it set at 70, which is actually a normal blood range. And so when it goes below 70, it'll start to alarm me, and it'll continue to alarm me, and it'll get louder and louder until I do something about it.
Sir, thank you for joining us today, and good luck with whatever you're doing next in your life. Coming up, the science behind hypoglycemic rage or the diabetes defense. Can your blood sugar cause you to snap? We're back talking about the very real criminal defense of hypoglycemic rage, better known as the diabetes defense. Here's the question. Can low blood sugar really cause someone to kill? I want to dive into this debate and the host debate surrounding these controversial defenses with our panel, crime correspondent Melissa Moore, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Clay Watson, and former homicide prosecutor and host of True Conviction on Investigation Discovery, Anna-Sigga Nicolazzi. They represent three very different perspectives when it comes to crime. I want to hear all their thoughts about this diabetes defense. So, Anna-Sigga, you're a prosecutor, so you must be fairly skeptical of a lot of these medical defenses anyway, but what about the diabetes defense?
Simply, I don't buy it. That doesn't mean that I don't believe that hypoglycemia can affect someone's behavior. I believe it can, but I don't buy into it at all based on all the science that we have to date as a complete defense to murder.
So you can be diabetic, but it doesn't cause you to kill somebody.
No.
It did work for this man we just spoke to.
His sentence was reduced, and what I'll note about that one, I'm glad to hear that he's remorseful and that he's doing well, but I do not believe that it is the hypoglycemia and the insulin injected that caused him to repeatedly strike his wife with a hammer, to get behind a wheel of a car that he controlled and run over her, when I think it's important to remember and note that it's reported that just 3 days before she had told him she wanted divorce. So while it may have impacted his behavior, I don't think that it is the actual thing that caused him to commit that crime.
So Clay, leave the motivation, possible motivation to the side. Just as a physician, when our blood sugar drops that low, especially if we don't have recall of what's happening, which that's what happens at that low blood sugar, is it possible you would do things you normally wouldn't want to do?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So a couple things we have to keep in mind is that with diabetes, we're talking about a problem with the fuel of the brain, right? The thing that runs the brain is glucose. There are certain physiological states where a person may not be acting normally. They may actually appear to be conscious, but they're not conscious. They may act out what looks like intentionally, looks like it's deliberate and violent, but in fact, they're actually in an altered mental state. So some examples of that, and of course these are rare situations. This is not something that will happen with everyday folks generally, but this can happen in sleepwalking cases. It can happen in cases where a person is in a mental state following a seizure, where they're not perceiving their environment properly and may actually misperceive threats in their environment. And it's very much similar to hypoglycemia, in which a person may actually act out because they're in an altered mental state. The fuel of the brain is not working correctly, their memories are not working correctly, and they may actually misperceive people in their environment. It's important, of course, to think about all the other possible motivations, but an evaluation in these cases will be important to be able to determine if hypoglycemia was actually involved.
And I guess in theory it could unleash a subconscious desire to get back at your wife for wanting a divorce, something you wouldn't normally act on. Melissa, you deal with the criminal mind quite a bit. Your thoughts?
Well, my mind goes to the victims. I think about his former wife, and I think there must have been, I would assume, domestic violence in the past. This isn't like I don't believe this was a one-time event. Obviously, it was the most traumatic and the most extreme, but I believe there had to have been another pattern of violence in the relationship. I also believe he's blame shifting here. I didn't hear in his interview that he took any accountability for the pain he's caused to his family. I didn't hear him say anything about that other than he doesn't get contact with his kids.
I will mention, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I will mention that if there is no history of violence in his past, if this is something that is extremely sort of different from his usual character, then it would be an important factor to consider. Is this something that's so out of character for a person who's never been violent, never engaged in this sort of threats towards wife and such? It would be one piece of the puzzle, but it certainly by itself wouldn't
But
be
what
enough.
about his kids though? Like, I wouldn't want to go visit him and know what he did to my mother, that he's capable of doing that to her, he's capable of doing that to me. It's really the responsibility of him to manage his blood sugar, which it sounds like he's
But
got.
also,
the
as a
tools.
diabetic, he knows that if you inject yourself with insulin, especially such a high dose, Dr. Oz, as you can talk best to, that he knows he has to eat. He knows he has to do something to compensate for that. He'd also just had this news, which is apparently quite devastating to him, that his wife wanted a divorce. And he took multiple deliberate actions. And that is something, as a prosecutor, to me, I would love to have this defense in the courtroom, because I believe jurors, they have common sense and they can see this as a veiled attempt to shift responsibility. Perhaps it should be considered as sentencing if you can show that, medically show with proof that it impacted his behavior, but not as a full defense in this case.
But also, Dr. Oz, when did they take his blood sugar? Because they didn't test him right away. Wasn't it maybe like hours afterwards?
Within an hour,
maybe it
I
got
think.
worse.
They took him from that curbside where he was dazed and got the blood pretty quickly. After they thought he was drunk, they thought they were going to prove that he had a high alcohol level. And that's part of this argument, of course. If I'm drunk and I kill somebody, you know, again, it might change the sentencing a little bit, but it's still my fault that I got drunk. How much of the burden does a diabetic face? Let me answer Anna-Sigga's point, though. What is this diabetes defense really about? So if I was in a courtroom, here's what I would say. You want your blood sugar to stay in a normal range. Let's say it's between 70 and, I don't know, 100. Even up to 120 maybe if you're a diabetic, right? That's okay. Now with diabetes, we often think about the level being too high, right? I'm all on the stage all the time talking about not having a diabetes level that's so high that it, you know, can cause all kinds of complications. But this defense is about what happens when the diabetic blood sugar level drops the other way, right? If you take insulin, which diabetics have to do, usually, it'll drop their levels sometimes below the 70 that's ideal. Remember Steve? His was 24. Not just a little low. At 24, I don't even know how he's conscious. Most people pass out. This is called hypoglycemia, and it causes things like shakiness at the beginning and some irritability, which can lead you to do things you wouldn't normally do, moodiness, confusion. But here's the big one: memory loss and then rage, as your body just can't deal with what's happening with the blood sugar. The metabolic fuel, as Clay said, is no longer there. And in cases like a diabetes defense, I got to say, it's argued that being in a diabetic coma, effectively, is like being involuntarily intoxicated. So I think as a prosecutor, I would think it through along those lines, even though maybe it's not quite as much my fault, because predicting your insulin level and your diabetes is not quite as easy as many would hope. That stated, let me give you my final thoughts. I think hypoglycemia being very dangerous is obvious, but I never heard of or even thought about it being used as a criminal defense until today's show. I'm open, Anna-Sigga, as you are, to sensing differences, but it's ultimately up to the judge and the jury, using common sense, to decide if the motivation was there already. It's a mixed story, I think, in this case. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.